Now, with rapidly expanding population, Indian cities are unable to keep pace with the growing demand for efficient and adequate urban services, especially in the sectors of water, waste, and energy. At the same time, aided by a national focus on innovation, which has been intensifying over the last couple of years, innovation in public service delivery from the MSME sectors is slowly but surely picking up. However, most of this innovation is directed towards private sector, and there remains a gap in leveraging and scaling it for public good. To bridge this gap, WRI India developed a powerful value accelerator called the CityFix Labs to bring together the stakeholders in the innovation ecosystem. During the course of the accelerator, we found that MSMEs faced a significant barrier in scaling through public sector, largely due to procurement challenges. They focus on cost-only criteria, a strict regulatory framework, detailed administrative procedures, and mainly a reluctance to undertake risk associated with innovation has limited government's engagement with innovation. Adding to this is the problem of the lack of transparency and accountability, which has stunted the participation of MSMEs in the process. However, during the pandemic, we saw governments, whether in Orissa or Kerala, experimenting with several innovative processes to procure medical supplies. This then begs the question, are there approaches that can be transposed and examined for public service delivery as well, given how critical it is to the health and well-being of citizens? The session today will try to delve into some of these learnings we've had from the experiments in innovative procurement in the past year, and also what some other sectors are doing, and look at ways in which government can ease processes and explore new and innovative procurement methods to onboard innovation in a way that benefits all stakeholders. I will now request my colleague Aarti to share the findings from our study.
So across the world, efficient and equitable service delivery is seen as key to bettering the quality of life as well as an instrument to direct sustainable and inclusive growth. With India's rapidly urbanizing population, providing equitable access to quality urban services is considered quite a task, and one that we're struggling with. Only about 20% of total waste generated today is treated, only 62% of the urban population has access to treated tap water, and 34% of total electricity currently generated in the country is consumed by residential and commercial buildings. Now, as a public service, this is largely provided by government, and a government that is struggling with resource constraints. In fact, in this chart here that depicts city populations as against city per capita budgets, as you can see, Indian cities have some of the lowest per capita budgets to meet these requirements. So to understand where to position ourselves towards best addressing this challenge, we conducted a survey of the current support landscape for innovation in water, waste, and energy, and what has been encouraging. Well, for one, government has been offering extensive policy, financial, and procedural support towards the development of technological infrastructure, helping set up incubators, and there are flagship schemes like Startup India and Invest India, as well as over 50 government schemes. At the state government level, 21 of the 29 states are also pursuing startup policies. The government has also introduced new platforms like the government e-marketplace. Within investment, there has been a lot of philanthropic support and impact investment available within the civic tech space. There is a lot of research happening from the many prominent research institutions in the country. And most encouragingly, there is a growing pool of startups and entrepreneurs working on solutions in these spaces. In fact, as you can see from this graph, the number of startups has been growing exponentially since 2014. But there are still challenges, and what is holding us back? Despite the startup policies, few states have actually incorporated other measures like entrepreneurship cells or challenges and rewards, or even build linkages to other institutions and industries to really reinforce their policies. The schemes that already exist often have difficult qualification criteria. They aren't necessarily well publicized, and delays in disbursement of funds also deter cash-strapped startups. The current tendering process, as Jaya had already mentioned, is quite difficult for ventures to engage with, and that's something we will be discussing again later today. Consumers still have a low priority for environmental sustainability. Research is not sufficiently commercialized, which fails to really leverage the research that's been happening in the country. And investors aren't particularly inclined to engage with B2G models because of the struggles of MSMEs dealing with government. As you can see from this graph, the the investment in marketplaces and consumer digital enterprises is exponentially higher than that in waste management, energy, or water and waste management. And across stakeholder groups, there's also a geographic skew in support, with most of the incubation cells actually just in Maharashtra, Karnataka, and New Delhi. So where does the CityFix Lab come in? We designed the CityFix Labs to address these identified challenges, and we applied our methodology of evaluate, bridge, and accelerate. First, we assess the innovation ecosystem to understand what kind of solutions are available, what are the challenges that these enterprises face, and how can we best position ourselves to integrate. We then chose a cohort of enterprises to work with and design an accelerator program that targeted their specific challenges and brought the right stakeholders to the room. And finally, we conducted a series of workshops and stakeholder engagements to help the enterprises engage with government, investors, customers, and technical experts towards improving their offerings, adapting them to meet public use, and making them more viable for investment. So over the period of 2018 and 2019, we conducted outreach, reached out to over 500 enterprises, of which 125 actually applied to the program, and we selected a cohort of 10. These 10 were then taken through an accelerator program of 4 months, where they were capacitated through stakeholder workshops, as well as engagements with investors, government, and customers. And they received mentorship from 40 mentors across these stakeholder groups. We also introduced them to many city officials at varying stages, especially on-the-ground engineers, who were able to help them hone their solutions towards public use case. And they also interacted with the Smart Cities mission. And finally, they were facilitated to, pilots were facilitated, and these are still ongoing, while some have been postponed due to the pandemic. From the outcome of these pilots, as well as interviews with representatives across these stakeholder groups, we were able to distill some key findings. Across sectors, policy and regulation, awareness and capacity, financial sustainability, and data and implementation were key issues, though they took a slightly different shape in each sector. In water, though government is mandated to provide clean drinking water, policy and implementation rest with multiple agencies. This means that there can be little cohesion across agencies on water resource management. So, for example, although a ULB is mandated to provide clean drinking water for a city, infrastructure projects might be planned at the state level, and they may be dependent on the center for funds. And this can also deter the participation of private players, as they don't necessarily know who to identify within the government to engage. In terms of awareness and capacity, there is growing awareness around issues of water stress, but there aren't norms and mandates that really promote water measurement of water consumption or encourage the use of recycling and conservation technologies. And as a result, solutions are seen as good to have rather than must-haves. Even within the government, there's a tendency towards legacy systems of large engineered solutions, as they lack the human and financial resources or empowerment to guarantee water rights. And finally, though pricing is an effective mechanism to regulate water resources, the politicization of water sees implementing pricing solutions as politically unfavorable. And this has discouraged the participation of private investors in this space, as it's reduced the economic viability of private solutions. In terms of waste, despite recent changes and reforms to policy, there are gaps in enforcement. This leads to poor segregation and limited user fee collection. And this user fee collection subsequently impacts solution development, as innovation and technology use require high levels of segregation. Solutions that are available are often very localized and require buy-in from the community through time-consuming citizen awareness and education programs. And with limited peer-to-peer learning, solutions often fail to scale across geographies. In terms of financial viability, similar to water, this is a struggle, as waste generators don't see waste management as a service with a cost that they must bear, and they're reluctant to move to fee-paying models, and this in turn also affects investment into the space. Also, in terms of solutions, there's limited research on the viability of solutions within the Indian context, and this often means that solutions that are applied may not be suited to India. And even where there is research available, engagement gaps across the ecosystem lead to information not being communicated to decision makers. And finally, in energy, EE and RE are seen as private solutions for private interest, and not yet as an integrated part of better service or better energy productivity by utilities. As a result, a few states, despite making commitments to easing the transition to RE, they've been inconsistent about choosing between net metering or gross metering, and this creates an unstable policy environment for consumers considering solar. There's a lack of standards around around solutions available, and that has resulted in consumer confidence being low, and it also creates higher perceived risk for investors as they don't have standards or compliances against which to compare solutions. Um, Traditional sources of finance are also too risk averse to really engage with innovation enterprises, and this has led to the entrance of non-traditional sources like project financing or venture capitals. But these models are still in their infancy. And finally, the existing design of warranties and service contracts across the industry lacks the transparency required for easy interoperability of solutions. From these key findings, it becomes clear that across stakeholder groups, there are challenges that need to be addressed, and government remains one of the key stakeholders across the sectors, which is why government engagement with innovation and procurement will be the focus of the second half of today's session. So what have been some of the learnings from our lab experience? As already mentioned, government is a key stakeholder with wide reach and capacity to determine the rules of engagement. So clear signaling from the government can help build investor confidence, increase the scale of adoption and acceptance of solution, and direct research to help build an evidence base to frame policy. Government could also increase cohesion across their efforts through structured implementation using incentives and punitive measures. Until these process reforms happen, low-risk pilots allow ULBs to test and learn about new and innovative solutions. And finally, there's a need for clear and well-publicized norms and standards across sectors that can help direct innovation and build consumer confidence and awareness. These could include mandatory green building guidelines, standards for building EE solutions, and norms and mandates for wastewater and water efficiency solutions. In terms of investors, there's a need for hybrid financial instruments and patient capital that can have a multiplier effect by de-risking investment and helping them attract funding from mainstream commercial investors. Academia and researchers also need to conduct a more detailed study of the economics and political economy of urban services to plug the current gaps in knowledge. For example, most ULBs right now for ULB funds for waste management are spent on transportation, but allocating funds towards upgrading local collection centers with the capacity to clean, sort, and compress waste could actually reduce the cost of transportation, as they'd be able to manage most of the waste on site. And finally, businesses and governments can help consumers build awareness. Because in local government and civil society in Bangalore, for example, use extensive education and outreach programs to improve segregation behavior in the city. And decentralizing of solutions, particularly in waste management, can help build ownership and agency into the problem and increase accountability. So finally, these learnings really helped us identify a few opportunities to address these challenges, improving procurement processes, which is the focus of today's session, where we will look at some practices that have been working or can be adapted to address this issue. Expanding investment in innovation. So given the risk of innovation, spreading this risk by widening the net can really help investment come in. This could either be through systems like the social stock exchange, which was recently mentioned by the finance minister, which would function like a stock exchange for social impact organizations, increase liquidity, and by widening the group of investors. Or you could even find new groups of investors, for example, private corporate stakeholders. The Real Estate Regulation Act, for example, has incentivized developers to invest in innovation themselves to bring in innovation technologies that would help resource efficiencies and cost effectiveness. We can also break silos by leveraging and expanding other platforms of engagement. The success of the CityFix Labs, for example, in engaging different stakeholder groups, demonstrated the scope for other platforms to achieve similar outcomes. And finally, there's a need for anchor institutions that can help coordinate the effect of different stakeholder groups. One such example is the National Resource Efficiency Policy, which looks to coordinate resource efficiency efforts across actors and across the value chain in a number of pertinent sectors, including building and construction, solar PV, and others. I'd just like to close by saying that we hope the findings of this lab and this practice note can help contribute to a growing body of work on the innovation ecosystem, be leveraged to better coordinate the efforts of all stakeholders within this ecosystem, and help us design better and more impactful interventions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Aarti. I would now request Dr. O.P. Agarwal, CEO WRI India, to share his welcome address. Sir, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jaya, and a very warm welcome on behalf of WRI India to everyone present here. I'm delighted to see the panelists and the audience. It's really a delight to have you all. Aarti's presentation really highlighted some critical issues on connecting innovations to government systems. And as Jaya and Aarti very rightly pointed out, as our urban populations grow, and we expect that in the next 30 years, our urban population will be twice what it is today, which means what we're going to add in the next one generation is the urban population that we have had from the beginning of civilization. Just think of it, what we've got as urban population right from the time mankind started to the same number being added in the next one generation, the next 30 years. And we know the kind of gaps that we are facing in basic services, a lot of essential services, even at today's population. And when this doubles, I just shudder to think of what's going to happen if we continue with business as usual. This has to change. And the good thing is that innovations are now taking place in such a big way that this is the opportunity for us to take advantage of these innovations and help us resolve the kind of problems that we are facing. It's a kind of a time when some transitions are taking place. Government's processes in many places are still stuck in the old ways of doing things. And the old ways are that you go through an elaborate process of deciding the exact product that you want, and then go about a procurement process where you want to acquire that product. What innovations are saying are that, why don't you tell us what is the outcome you want? We will give you that outcome. You test whether the outcome that you're looking for has been delivered to you, not the product that you want. Now, this is the kind of little change that needs to come in the procurement processes within the government system. And it is beginning in some states which are a little more progressive. It is a little slower in other states, but that is really the direction in which things will have to go. Our own experience, there are examples that Aarti presented to you, some other examples where we've seen big differences in how we help procure last mile connectivity for metro systems in a number of cities. We started with Bangalore, then went to Kochi, then went to Hyderabad, then we went to Bombay. These are the states where things were a little more progressive. And what we were offering to them is, we will get you innovative last mile connectivity options through startups. We're not going to ask you for any money. What they are giving you, what they're only asking you for is some space where they can park their vehicles. All they're asking you for is information of your operations so that they can connect with your operations and give you that last mile connectivity. So these are the places where things were progressive, things happened, last mile connectivity could be offered. But other cities are yet to pick up. They're yet to understand what this can mean. They still think that last mile connectivity can only happen through bus services that they procure by paying a certain subsidy. So this is really that mindset change which needs to happen. But fortunately, that ability to understand what innovations are and think differently to get the product that you want, or rather the outcome that you want, is what needs to happen. What we are seeing here also through our experience is, you have innovators on one side who don't understand the government systems. You have government systems which don't understand what innovators are doing. Fortunately, we in WRI are well positioned to do the convening between them, bring the two together. And as that slide that Aarti showed is a very nice slide, we function as the bridge. And that bridge is what has helped many cities in really using the kind of knowledge that we have acquired, the processes that we have acquired in bringing that bridge, and that's working well. We're hoping that through these discussions, we'll be able to accelerate, or rather scale up these kinds of innovations getting deployed in more and more cities, because I think without that, it's going to be very difficult to meet the gaps that we are facing today. So with this, let me wish all of you a very happy discussion, very informative discussion. We look forward to learning a lot from the discussions and taking our own work forward. Thank you very much. Back to you, Jaya.
Thank you so much, sir, for those inspiring words and for basically setting the context for why this is such a huge problem and why this needs to be tackled now. I would now like to call upon our keynote speaker. As keynote speaker, we have today with us Dr. K. Rajeshwara Rao, Special Secretary, Niti Aayog. Dr. Rao leads the Urban Development, Managing Urbanization and Urban Poverty Alleviation Skill Development, Labor and Employment verticals. He's a 1988 batch member of the Indian Administrative Service. Dr. Rao's career spans over 32 years as an administrative and development professional. He has worked with the Union Ministries of Women and Child Development, Food Processing, Railways, Health and Family Welfare and Mines. As the Chief Vigilance Officer, CONCOR, and with the state governments of Tripura and Andhra Pradesh in sectors such as urban development, education, and social development. He has conceptualized and implemented several development projects supported by bilateral and multilateral organizations, and has rich experience not just in development administration, but also in organizational and human resource development, finance and community development, and empowerment of self-help groups. Dr. Rao, a very warm welcome to you, and over to you for the keynote address.
Yeah, good morning, friends. Thank you, Jaya, for the warm welcome and introduction. O.P. Agarwal ji and my colleagues from Niti, Partha Reddy, I think, has joined as advisor, and also other colleagues and distinguished stakeholders and participants. It's always a pleasure to interact with the urban stakeholders, because that was my passion since 1997, when I was first introduced to the urban sector in Andhra Pradesh by the then government. Aarti, I have two observations to make. You are very young and promising analyst, but you are using a 2016 data, which is perhaps completely outdated and irrelevant now. So perhaps next time you should use the current data. Number two, I was pleasantly surprised to see your learnings and opportunities, because when I did a program called Andhra Pradesh Urban Services for the Poor, which is a 745 crore program, which is the world's largest urban reform project in 32 cities of Andhra Pradesh, similar findings were there in 97, 98. So I think, I don't know. So our perceptions are not changing, our situations are not changing, our realities are remaining as it is. So I request Mr. O.P. Agarwal perhaps to tell the team again to revisit and relook the whatever sample size they adopted in those cities and entrepreneurs, so that perhaps some fresh inputs from fresh thoughts can come, which will be relevant, because much water has flown during the time in terms of reforms and other things are there. Again, when we say urban is not a homogeneous entity. We are all aware. The challenges which Mr. O.P. Agarwal has been mentioning, metros, lost mile connectivity of metro cities is different from a tier 3, tier 4 cities, where getting a bus shelter when there is a rain to take a shelter is a big facility, because when a bus shelter is constructed, for them it is what a good service being made by the municipality. So perhaps expectations differ, opportunities differ, awareness differ. That is the beauty of our urban sector. But anyhow, next 30 years, I think we are here to face a major challenge, a challenge of century, because there will be urban explosion. Again, we have not really defined, though our government definition 31%, but in the practice of the assessment of various professional organizations, national, international, we are already, I think, having 50% of our population in urban areas, including peri-urban areas and also the extended urban areas which are not declared urban. So the challenge is perhaps 4,041 statutory towns will have several categories of challenges. And also, how do we bring 3,892 census towns into the urban mainstream is another challenge. So in 97, 98, when why I liked the subject, and I cancelled 2 meetings to join you is because leveraging innovative public procurement was tried by me in '98 when I was Joint Secretary in the Government of Andhra in the Urban Administration and Chief of APSP, giving the women group the sanitation service, which is the first time it was outsourced, and I got the Golden Award and 25,000 cash award also, which I gave it to the members of that group. We outsourced about 3 square kilometer area, taken out from the municipality, given to the women, and arranged the tractor, modern equipment, and uniform to give them dignity and these things. That was clicked so well. I'm talking about 25 years back, a story. So perhaps there must be hundreds of innovations which are not documented, which are not replicated, which are discussed also. Because Niti Aayog, we maintain a good practice in our website. There are more than 1,000 good practices out there. What I request WRI, perhaps these, you can call out these procurement practices and guide the municipalities, because the problem with the municipalities is lack of knowledge, lack of, I think, inadequate professionalism, what we call. Again, I'm not talking about the metros or million+ cities. There are several senior officers as the municipal commissioners, mayors. The situation is totally different. But the situation with other towns are this thing. But one good thing is they are receptive. Recently, I chaired a UNDP ASCII coordinated innovation platform for the plastic management, plastic waste management, and also the plastic management. And there were about 2 dozens of innovators were there. We could connect to the municipalities. Municipalities, they were very receptive. Of course, again, there are archaic procurement rules are there, and also they are not really aware about the process of the procurement, but we could tell them. So this leveraging innovative public procurement is the perhaps the real challenge, because they have funds now from various resources. They don't have functionaries. They don't have perhaps the knowledge base and also the exposure to use these practices. Like DFR 2019, which is a government procurement manual, gives a lot of opportunity for the local self-government and also Panchayat Raj institutions to try certain innovative models. And also many schemes have 25% flexi funds to try this. But still, again, because of the problem of 3 C's, people hesitate or they adopt the perhaps procurement issues very slowly. So the waste, water and energy and MSMEs are perhaps the in thing in this decade, because they have employment opportunity, they have a commercial opportunity, because the limitations of the municipal staff is a big opportunity for all entrepreneurs and so-called service providers to try and do the provide municipal services for a cost, because urban waste management is mostly now, I think, given to the private sector, including waste to wealth, waste to energy. Only challenge there is, I think, procurement cost. They are not getting collected or they are not getting levied there. But waste, I think, and water treatment perhaps is again new entrant in the most of the municipalities, because they are not realizing the importance of the water recycling or water reusage. Perhaps that is going to happen. But waste to energy is, I think, should now expand to the other grades of the municipalities. So, but platforms for engagement is there. I think adequate platforms are there, be it a eGov mechanism or a state RTA mechanism to give the views, to tell the issues about the municipality. Or every municipality also, most of the municipalities, not every municipality, also has a weekly grievances day, like any other district officers, where people can go, people can listen. But the solution lies in strengthening the ward level, what we call sub-municipal administration. If we can perhaps converge all this at the ward level, coordinate, and empower the communities to demand, challenge as a right, not as a facility or not as a courtesy, but it is as a right because they are paying for water, they should get good water. I think perhaps that is a good solution, and we have to synergize all our innovators, procurement issues, beginning with the ward level. Perhaps I think that is a very effective solution, but though there are supposed to be ward committees as per the 74th Amendment, which is again depending on the state legislations, but most of the states it is not done or not implemented. So we, as a governance reform, we will be advocating to the municipal managements to strengthen the ward level committees, and also this is called municipal fellows. They are tried in Delhi, they are tried in some of the, like Raipur, we suggested that they can have a municipal fellows. In Niti Aayog, we have a lateral entrance. We take specialists, they come 3 to 5 years. So yesterday we had a big launch on urban planning reforms. I don't know, some of you must have seen it. We have suggested that the municipality should be empowered to take lateral entrance, particularly to focus on the procurement issues. Procurement of goods, procurement of services are the fundamental for giving innovative services to the customers to their satisfaction. In case if there is a procurement mechanism, strong mechanism, perhaps that will take care of the most of the grievances of the customers and also the stakeholders. Yesterday we suggested that, and we will be having a seminar with the program. So we will be using your findings. If you refine your findings and share us next 2-3 weeks, so perhaps we will also share those findings with other municipal stakeholders. So the expansion of the urban systems and also the demand-driven approach of the enlightened communities or empowered communities is a very good enabling environment now in the majority of the municipal towns or many municipal towns to perhaps leverage their innovative public procurement processes, and the platforms like WRI and ASCII, UNDP perhaps will facilitate and expand the knowledge base, awareness levels, because one of the finding is awareness is a issue. That is what Aarti was mentioning. And 200 city officials and 40 mentors, what did they do qualitatively to improve or to influence the decision making or thinking? Perhaps I think that has not come in the presentation, but that would be very interesting to understand what is happening. So low risk pilots, they are free to do. One of the suggestions of the presentation is in the low risk pilots. Actually, 74th Constitution Amendment empowers the municipalities to try many initiatives within their resources. Of course, there are mega programs are there, including housing, Swachh Bharat Mission, Amrut, Mission Smart Cities. They have a structure with a particular outcome output framework is there. But municipalities can always try and experiment various procurement process, and they can be others to learn. So perhaps I think they can, there is no bother, there is no obstacle for them to do those things. I am sure that many urban functionaries who are here can take this and can do the local procurement process, but it has to be transparent, it has to be objective, it has to be quality oriented. The problem is quality and clear procurements as the big issue in the municipal procurement systems, but there are adequate platforms of engagement out there. But only thing is you should have the citizens should have interest to spend time. And we all live in Delhi and some of them are Mumbai, Chennai, I don't know where or there. How much time really we take in the interest, time, energy in the city management? We should be honest. We don't take because we think that at a TKR, some other person will put some pressure or petition. So we can do that because we all stay in the most of the gated communities, government colonies, many of us. So it's all, I think, institutional framework takes care of us. But that is not perhaps we require from the urban India. Urban India, perhaps all the academicians, officials, non-officials, civil society, students, we should start demanding the service. We should start pinpointing the shortcomings in a realistic manner, because municipal service is like an emergency, what do we call a operations control room. You provide service for 364 days. One day you don't pick up your garbage or you don't supply water, there is crisis. So it is like a medical service of 24/7. So they have to be on tenterhooks to provide the services. So I think that this is a good platform to do these things. But since our urban is not homogeneous, urban has challenges depending on the category of towns, depending on the geography, because again there is urban India and there is a rural India. Within our states, only 12 states are having a substantial major urban population, and for many is a substantial rural population. The orientation of the policymakers, the thinkers, the stakeholders also change with the demands, the requirements, and do these things. But I think that when we do innovation, so local culture, local enterprises, local practices, and local traditions are extremely important, because India is such a huge country. It is equivalent to European Union, and each municipality have their own practices. It can be social practice, a cultural practice, or economic practice, a powerful self-help group, a powerful women organization, or a good procurement process. Perhaps I think local culture, local sentiments should be taken care of. That is what I suggested to other groups also. We cannot ignore, we cannot supersede all the local practices. So mend your innovation, mend your technology, mend your technological approach with the local culture, local practices, so that adaptability would be very high and they will be seamlessly adopting this thing. And technology perhaps is helping already in many municipalities, and perhaps it will further leverage with more and more computerization. There is a national urban stack also with the Ministry of Urban Affairs, which in fact gives a lot of leverage to even a tier 5 municipality to adopt certain practices, certain service outsourcing in a standardized manner. So people can use that. And ICT also has already breaking the barriers, because urban, the connectivity is a little better compared to the rural areas. So the technology is used for your water and energy purpose also, not only for conservation, for saving, but slowly they also will be outsourced to groups of women or groups of men or individual contractors. So the feedback mechanism is again a weak area in our municipal systems. Perhaps one can constantly harp on the feedback mechanism so that municipalities will initiate process for the public to better satisfaction of the citizen and customer. So local skill sets, local traditional practices I mentioned, municipal practice also, or management practices can always be kept in view while we work in this activity. So competition for quality and economic service delivery is also important, because we have to promote the competition. With the competition, perhaps we can break the monopoly, we can break the other interests, and create confidence in the municipal system that alternative service is available. The problem in the small towns is that if X goes, who will do the job? Is there any alternative? Perhaps we have to develop the capacity of maybe self-help groups and also cooperative societies to take up to provide the services, and private sector definitely is a key stakeholder. But I think in the next 10 to 15 years, they will become a major stakeholders, and there is a need to develop the capacity of the private sector also. If they become overnight operators for a quick money, then they can't sustain in the urban mechanism. They have to look for a long-term investment, long-term practices. I think that is the another issue. So The indigenous ways are there, where perhaps because of these platforms they can learn. And also, we are extremely becoming urban sensitive. The policymakers, the programs are there which will taking care of these things. I'm sure that the future would be very bright, and more and more towns joining in the urban, more and more areas joining urban, and more innovation coming in the public procurement, and also the constant improvements in the government procurement practices. And perhaps with the capacity building, there will be, I think, a lot of, I'm very optimistic because I have seen the last 22, 23 years, there is a substantial change of mindset. That is also very important. Change of mindset, change of orientation among the local functionaries, both elected and non-elected is there. More and more professionalism will crop in. So it's a good platform. I thank the organizers because it is very dear to my heart. So that's why I thought I should talk to you. And but WRI, I request that perhaps your refined conclusions and learnings, if you can share, perhaps we can use it appropriately. I'm sure that this discussion would be more practical and grounded so that everybody can tell and participate actively. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rao. That is tremendous food for thought. Just a couple of points that I would like to mention here. So our study, Dr. Rao, was based on an accelerator that we ran between 2017, 18, and 19. So the data is from then, and basically, now it's taken a year to kind of formulate that study and the publication process. We will be launching this publication with you today here, and we will share that publication with you. Some of the points that you mentioned have indeed been included in the publication, and actually the points about procurement, the next session, the panel discussion is actually about that. And we will just make a very brief sort of introductory presentation, and we would love for you to kind of stay on because you obviously and clearly have an interest and tremendous insights into this topic. So thank you so much for your words, and thank you so much for all of the information that you offered. It will also create a great background for a discussion which we are going to take on now. So thank you very much, Dr. Rao. And with that, Aarti, over to you for the inauguration of the publication and then onto the panel.
Thanks, Jaya. And yeah, happy to share that this is the publication. It's available online now. And we hope that you find value in the learnings that we have to share.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we will move on to the next part, which is the discussion on the procurement challenge. And we will share a small sort of context-setting presentation with you. Over to you, Aarti.
Thanks, Jaya. So, as was mentioned today, we have identified government as a key stakeholder in the scaling of innovation solutions for urban service delivery. So I'm going to add a little more nuance as requested by Dr. Rao. And this is actually the key conversation that we're looking to have today. So public procurement of innovation actually helps overcome market failures by building critical mass of demand. And here by procurement, we mean the purchase of goods and services by public entities at all levels of government. And in India, that's a massive sum, about 20 to 30% of the national GDP as of 2030. So currently, this procurement is not really regulated by any one kind of legislation, but largely by the general financial rules, with different entities issuing procurement manuals. So what is the relationship between procurement and innovation? And in fact, it's actually quite symbiotic. Procurement as a tool can help stimulate innovation. It creates large critical mass of demand. It can stimulate private R&D investment. Through this same scale of procurement, it can help diffuse product use and influence standards in the market. And it can also overcome user and supplier gaps that may have failed to identify some needs by signaling these unmet needs to the market. In return, procurement offers cost-effective value for money innovation solutions for public services. It can improve efficiency and effectiveness of public funds, and it can create conditions to enhance competitiveness and productivity within government. But as already mentioned in the earlier presentation, there are some challenges engaging with public procurement. As Dr. Rao mentioned, there is still a sort of focus on cost-only criteria. And this focus on cost-only criteria kind of stems from the fact that government has limited options to respond to anti-competitive behavior that might arise from quality-linked criteria. Thirdly, complex processes and governance structures deter private participation. Further, the extensive scrutiny on how government spends public funds and the existence of acts that focus on corruption means that there are often government organizations are often risk averse, especially when it comes to using these public funds on innovation. And finally, the long cycles, whether in terms of sales or payment, means that cash-strapped smaller enterprises struggle to participate in these processes. There have been some encouraging examples of public procurement of innovation that have inspired us to have this conversation today to explore what could be done in India. So, for example, Korea chose to emphasize on the role of SMEs in order to simultaneously promote small businesses while also allowing government to benefit from the innovation coming out of these spaces. So they introduced online procurement through a platform, GoNet, which opened up participation to more businesses while also increasing transparency. They also changed the type of contracting, moving to limited competition rather than open competition. So what this is workable competition between qualified competitors rather than just open competition. And while open competition sort of implies transparency and instinctively suggests efficiency, in actuality, limited competition turned out to be more cost-effective and efficient. In other words, the quality of the competitors making bids is better than the number of competitors participating. And finally, they promoted priority procurement from SMEs. And so as to not make certification an additional hurdle for SMEs, they also supported certification by providing financial support for certification fees. Another example is the EU, though this is a much more comprehensive approach to innovation procurement. In the EU, public procurement accounts for about a fifth of Europe's GDP. And because public authorities' purchasing decisions impact millions of people through the supply chain, in 2014, they launched a program called Horizon 2020, which is a large research and innovation program designed to drive economic growth, create jobs, and apply their research and scientific acumen towards tackling specific social challenges. And as a part of this, they first went about reforming their procurement. So the changes made to their procurement directives were designed to facilitate the increase of innovation procurement and included making procedures more flexible and simple, offering clear conditions on how they could establish joint procurements between agencies to create sufficient demand to stimulate solutions. They strengthened the use of life cycle costing, which in itself promotes innovation. And they also established innovation partnerships, which allowed public authorities to enter into structured partnerships with a supplier with the objective of actually developing an innovative product for the solution with then the subsequent purchase of the outcome. And they also exempted procurement of R&D services. In addition to this, they sort of supplemented the policy with financial support, where they either offered finance to startups and smaller businesses, as well as large institutions and businesses that were innovating through their InnoFin program. They also offered financial support to public agencies that were procuring through PPI, which is the Public Procurement of Innovation, or PCP, that is the pre-commercial procurement, which is when public agencies basically pay for R&D services to develop solutions to challenges. And they also finance any kind of coordination and support actions that agencies wanted to conduct through grants. And finally, they supplemented both of these with capacity building efforts. And these included training programs, sensitization programs for investors, as well as the creation of a procurement network and platform where best practices and lessons could be exchanged, and also helped encourage engagement between different public agencies on procurement practices. They also use challenges and reward mechanisms to promote specific sectors. Now, India too has been seeing some innovative procurement models. A well-known example is EESL's bulk procurement model. The National Mission for Energy Efficiency, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, and EESL implemented the Unnat Jyoti Buy Affordable LEDs for All, or Ujala scheme, to help create critical mass demand for LEDs. So by tendering for bulk procurement, the partnership was able to actually increase the market size and benefit from the economies of scale that created lower prices. And this model could find application in other sectors. In the US, it was used for solar PV. In India, they're testing the use for air conditioning. And aside from reduced prices, environmental benefits, peer influence, and potentially reduced cost of financing are some of the linked benefits. As Jaya mentioned earlier, COVID has also inspired some procedural changes to procurement due to the urgency of the products and solution requirements. These included bypassing traditional procurement processes by either direct contracting from existing sellers, uses of exemptions, or even creating interdepartmental procurement committees that speed up decision making. Government has also, as Dr. Rao mentioned, there are a lot of platforms available. The government has made consistent efforts to improve transparency within procurement for a number of key procurement platforms, including GEM, CPPP, and IREPS, as well as testing solutions like integrity packs, which bind both the procuring entities as well as the sellers to certain ethical conduct and transparency standards for all contracts above a certain threshold level. They've also introduced a platform called TREDS, which is aimed at addressing the financial liquidity issues within government contracts by allowing the auctioning of these trade receivables. But the high registration charge per transaction, as well as the limited participation of financiers on the platform, has deterred small players from using the platform so far. So this brings us to today's discussion. And the key questions that we're hoping to address are, how do we leverage and mainstream what already exists? As we already said, there are these platforms, GEM, TREDS, CPPP, but with low participation on these platforms, the key question is, how can government actually engage more stakeholders to better leverage these resources? And how can we expand what is done through these platforms to include things like capacity building, peer-to-peer learning, and scaling? Secondly, how do we address innovation risk for government officials handling public funds? And what kind of innovative tools, methods, and incentives can actually help better spread risk and build trust between public and private stakeholders? And finally, what are the large procedural changes needed to operationalize new processes and incentivize government agencies to engage with innovation? As in, how can government use the large procurement demand that it has to direct private innovation in alignment with broader government objectives? With that, I'll hand it over to Jaya, who's moderating our panel discussion for today.
Thank you, Aarti. And now I would like to call on our panelists. First, we have Mr. Chandrasekhar Jain. Mr. Jain is a sectoral expert on infra projects and energy from Niti Aayog. Then we have with us Mr. Mithun John, who is Joint CEO of the Maharashtra State Innovation Society, and Ms. Shrishti Gupta. Ms. Shrishti Gupta is an IRTS officer. She served in various capacities in the Mumbai division of Central Railways and is currently on sabbatical for higher studies. I would like to invite the three panelists now. Welcome, and we are very happy to have you here. Now, as Mr. Rao sort of said in this context about what are some of the things that we can discuss for the panel today, I think it's very clear, and we can all agree that for the Indian economy to flourish, the prosperity of the micro, small, and medium enterprises known as MSME sector is crucial. MSMEs also advance a more equitable distribution of national income between urban and rural India, something that also Mr. Rao pointed out. Yet, when we look at ease of doing business, we're really focused on large companies and larger corporations. So with that, with MSMEs typically, and Aarti has mentioned this, there are many problems, many issues with kind of onboarding them, taking them on. There are many processes which have been put into place, streamlined, many platforms, but yet there are things which are lacking for it to kind of achieve the scale that a country like India needs. So starting from prescriptive tendering processes to complex governance structure, the risk and scrutiny that the government officials who try to onboard these innovations face, the lack of a comprehensive legal framework and the lack of incentives or mandates are all things which are kind of crippling the scale of innovation in our country. So first, I would like to start with Mr. Jain. Now, there is a public procurement policy by the Ministry of MSME, but it is still regulated largely by the general financial rules, with different entities issuing procurement manuals. And that's kind of become standard procedure even at the municipal level. Now, some union ministries like Defense, Railways, Telecoms, they allocate about 50% of their respective budgets for public procurement. And one could make the argument that there is a need because they are there are products that they need for their functioning, and so a lot of what they do requires public procurement. But yet, so does municipal urban service, and others don't, and other departments don't, or they can't. How can this be changed?
Hello. So first of all, I thank the organizers to invite me in this year's event, Connect Karo 2021, and session on leveraging innovative procurement for urban services with special focus on waste, water, and energy. I must begin with the optimism that in recent years, there are several big ticket reforms and policy measures that have been already initiated in the right direction, and the need of our is to remove some of the remaining stumbling blocks and further accelerate the pace of reforms. So the current discussion on innovation in procurement, and I would also say in project and program management, which is currently undergoing in discussion at NITI Aayog, is very relevant and timely. So there are perspectives. Let's first begin with the procurement process. A transparent and credible procurement process that could attract adequate investor interest and generate competitive pressure right through the end, right from the beginning to the end of the process is crucial in coming up with a sound project viability. Sorry. So there is more focus, first of all, there is more focus on procurement of services, that is outcome-based services rather than buying or procuring of equipment. NITI Aayog is recommending use of waterfall methodology as a filtering criteria for choosing preferred mode of execution of works with preference to PPP, then toll or annuity or hybrid annuity, and then EPC. We are going to discourage item rate procurement that are more prone for corruptions and less transparent procedure, more inefficient. So adequate due diligence need to be conducted prior to arriving at a decision that which mode has to be executed, and it should be the right method should be chosen after eliminating the market has been tested. So we are encouraging public-private partnership that has to be that have increasingly come forth as a mechanism for delivering infrastructure projects in India, with India today being recognized as one of the largest market for PPP projects in the world. With many years of experience, the PPP framework in many sectors of India is now undergoing significant policy and regulatory reforms so as to reach the next level of maturity. NITI Aayog, which has been mandated to provide directional and policy inputs to the government, has developed a federal cooperative structure to plan and facilitate some large PPP projects across central-line ministries, states, and union territories. Regarding procurement process, NITI Aayog is working on alternative mechanisms to least cost selection method, which will give innovation and which will bring more or better competitive bidders who can offer better quality into project procurements. So the committee is already working on such reforms, and we have studied the World Bank's, ADB's procurement manuals, and we have seen how value for money can be brought into Indian public procurement. There are several, we have discussed about capacity building of the urban local bodies. So in this regard, a reform has been initiated. A task force was constituted by NITI Aayog on program and project management that recommend to prepare a national program and project management policy framework and to set up a national body National Institute of Chartered Project and Program Professionals for certifying the program and project management professional, as well as for running capacity building programs of government officials who are managing these public and PPP projects. So in this direction, NICPP will be housed under QCI, and QCI is going to shortly initiate the certification process for the program and project management professional, as well as launching the pilot training programs. Hello. So further, there is emphasis on using NITI Aayog model EPC contract documents, which are made and available. So in this regard, there are several model concession agreement has also already been formulated at NITI Aayog, which could be used by these urban local bodies for better outcomes. This I would like to say, and request other panelists to add upon.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Jain. And I'll come back to you on the alternatives to the least cost method, and also the training programs that you're establishing through NITI. I would now like to come to you, Ms. Gupta. If you could just in terms of you basically put in a large EV infrastructure sort of plan for Mumbai and deployed EV infrastructure there. Now, were there any changes in the policy or the process which have happened recently that have made the procurement much more innovation friendly? What did you engage with? What methods did you engage with? What were the benefits and drawbacks of the processes that you used?
Thank you, Jaya. So as you rightly mentioned that while working in Mumbai division, I got a chance on improving the service delivery as a transport organization. So one of the few things that I could work on is promoting or making our infrastructure ready for e-mobility. So what we essentially did is that we have provided our stations, which are, as we can all imagine, in Bombay, the stations are in very prime locations. So we have used, the strategic locations of our stations to develop EV infrastructure with an objective to obviously ramp up the EV infrastructure that is required for e-mobility in general, and also to make our premises ready for EVs so that our passengers, our citizens at large can avail that facility. So that is precisely the activity that has been undertaken. Coming to your specific question of if there were any policy changes which helped us to undertake these activities, then I would like to draw your attention to a very interesting thing that happened within railways. So since 2015, some of you may be aware the railway has been focusing on increasing its non-fare revenue. So, and in course of doing that, a lot of liberal policies have been initiated by the Ministry of Railways. So while we did not have a specific policy for EVs as such, but we did have some policies for non-fare revenue, which were very liberal, that explicitly emphasized on promoting innovation. So some of us officers at divisional level could use those policies to even promote service delivery of this kind of related to e-mobility or upgraded passenger amenities. So yeah, so there were two policies, to be precise, from Ministry of Railways, but the interesting thing about that is that they were not specifically for EVs, but they were about innovation and about augmenting railways resources. And then we could build up an interesting model in which the EV partners that we had could also join in, and we could also develop an alternate stream of revenue for railway, and which is now which started from Bombay, but it is now recognized by Ministry of Railways as a green source of revenue for us. So it is a slightly different mode of procurement, but in the end, the larger objective of providing this service was achieved, and there was a degree of innovation, I would say.
Great, and Ms. Shrishti, I'll come back to you on basically, what were, since you had EV partners, what kind of feedback did you receive from them, and in terms of the process that they went through. I'll come back to you on that. I'll go to Mr. Mithun John now. Mr. John, let's flip the lens a bit. Now, in your opinion, what are the challenges that the public sector faces in procuring innovation? We know what the MSMEs are struggling with, but in your opinion, having done a lot of this in Maharashtra, what is some of the learning that you have from the public sector?
I'm sorry, Jaya. Could you please come again? I missed a part of that question.
Sorry. So, Nitin, what I was saying is that, if we flip the lens a bit, we know how MSMEs are sort of struggling with, kind of getting onboarded, although there are some, progressive policies and processes that have enhanced their participation. But to flip that question, what are the challenges that the public sector is facing in onboarding or, procuring innovation, in your opinion, based on sort of the startups that you interact with?
Sure, Jaya. So first of all, thank you very much for having us as a part of this discussion. And on behalf of Maharashtra State Innovation Society, I'm glad to contribute to this. So now let me just, in the interest of some people who may not be aware of what we do. So Maharashtra State Innovation Society is the nodal agency of the government to support the startup ecosystem in Maharashtra. And over the last 3.5 years since we have been there, we have been trying to have a host of initiatives to engage with these startups as well as various ecosystem partners that are there in Maharashtra and as well as across India. Now, coming specifically to the question that you asked in terms of the kind of issues that public enterprises or the governments face when it comes to onboarding of startups. There's no very clear guidelines as to how you induct these new technologies. So when you talk of startups, chances are very often these are disruptive companies and there's no prior specification or prior benchmarks to what they actually do. So as a government officer, it becomes very difficult for us to, or for the government enterprises to create a mechanism as to how you can, because chances are there are not too many companies like this. So say, for example, any tender that you have, you need 3 people to come and, code for it. So that I would say is one challenge that is there. Of course, a lot of it are being addressed and I'll come to that later. And number 2, I would say, and like it's widely known, the government procurement is through a tendering process, which means there are certain criteria that need to be met. The most notorious ones are, number of years of existence or number of, the turnover that a certain company has done, or have you executed a project like this in the past with the government. And unfortunately, chances are most startups, would not have fitted this, would not have been eligible for a criteria like this. But let's look at the brighter side, Jaya. So over the last 4-5 years, given the amount of work and the trust that's been put in from various central government agencies like, say, Startup India, Invest India, as well as NITI Aayog, as well as, and Aarti did mention this, at last count, as far as I know, close to 29 states in India have a state nodal agency for supporting startups. So there's at least, a dedicated team in place to, where startups can voice their concerns. And there is somebody within the government that represents startups or is trying to fight for the cause of startups. And there have been certain initiatives launched by each of these states and central agencies to see how we can involve in a more closer manner, or how can we have more startups that can work with various government entities. Now, let me cite a few examples. Let's look at Maharashtra Startup Week, which is our flagship event. So each year we have 24 startups that we choose, not just from Maharashtra, but across India. And we give them an opportunity to pilot their product with the government of Maharashtra. So it's a paid pilot for 15 lakhs. And we only look at startups, in sectors where the government is a key stakeholder. So we are talking about sectors like agriculture, healthcare, education, smart infra mobility, governance, etc. So these are all sectors where the government is a large buyer as well as a key stakeholder. So each year we identify 24 such startups and we give an opportunity to them to pilot their product with various departments within the government of Maharashtra. So say, for example, if you're a healthcare startup and if you're a winner among the 24 winners in the startup week, you get an opportunity to deploy your product with the health department, government of Maharashtra. And as Innovation Society, if you just leave a startup to do the pilot, it's not an ideal world. So we go a long way to help each of these 24 to execute these pilots with various government. And the objective of this was to give them a foot in the door. Now, this is not, we're not talking about very large scale procurement, but the idea was we give a foot in the door to 24 such startups each year. And so far, of the 4 editions of the Startup Week, I'm pleased to let you know that close to 72 startups have received these work orders. And in a lot of cases, we have even been the first customer. So, so that's what we are trying to solve. And now let's just look at how these are screened. So we have screening partners, independent screening partners. In fact, WRI is one of the screening partners for the Smart Infra and Mobility. But and the screening partners, we get about 2,000 applications each year. And we arrive at the top 100. The top 100 then pitch to sector-specific panels. Now, on the panel, we have investors, we have partners like WRI, we have Umedyar. We also insist there are senior government bureaucrats from that particular sector. Because the underlying theme is any startup that comes as a winner at the Startup Week needs to have a use case for the government. So we are not looking to find the next Zomato, the next Uber. We are trying to look for startups that have a use case for the government. In this case, the government of Maharashtra. We are not saying only government, but you need to have an application for it, because what we are giving you is not a cash prize or a grant. It's quite clearly a work order. And that's how we are differentiating ourselves, because when we looked around, there are a lot of events that give you a cash prize or a grant, but we felt the way we can have more skin in the game is by providing a platform to these early stage startups. So we have had 4 editions, the most recent one being in July this year. And so 96 startups. So for the previous 72, we have already committed. So we are trying to create these channels by which, the reason we have the government officers on the panel is because we want them to be aware of what are the new innovations that are, and we have very often seen. So when we started off the Startup Week, the first edition, we found it really difficult to even have one IAS officer or one government official on the panel. But I'm glad to let you know that now it's become a problem of plenty, because we have a lot of these officers, because over the years they have seen the kind of projects that are being deployed, and so that's a welcome change that we are seeing. So that's one. The other change that we are seeing is government departments are now willing to top up the pilot. So say if they like a particular project and we give them a 15 lakh. So the Innovation Society is actually funding each of these. So that respective government department doesn't have to break its head as to how I'm going to fund this 15 lakh. But some of the departments have a provision. So say if they like a particular project, so they are like, we would like to top it up with another 15 lakhs or another 30 lakhs. So that's what we are trying to achieve. And in an ideal world, what we are looking at is these startups that are working with various departments go ahead and have a larger opportunity to participate in the large scale procurements that happen. So the Startup Week is one activity where we have had fairly strong traction. We are looking also at a grand challenge. So we launched one with the Fisheries Department, another one that we are going to launch very soon with the Pollution Control Board. So in the Startup Week, we are identifying 24 innovative products and then taking them to pilot, with various government departments. The grand challenge, we are sourcing problem statements from the various government departments and then throwing open, to the ecosystem looking for solutions. But the good thing is, in the grand challenge, and this is a change we have seen over the last 3-4 years, there are multiple government departments coming forward saying that we would like to fund a grand challenge for $500,000 to solve, these 3 problems for our team. So that's a welcome change that we are seeing, as far as, So I think enough is being told about the challenges that are there, but I would like to focus, more on what incremental changes. So when you're in the government, you really can't change everything overnight. But the good thing is, over a period of time, we see a lot of changes, and it's not just Maharashtra. To be honest, there are a lot of other states that are trying to do their bit to see how the governments can interact or open up their themselves as a market for startups. So, and let me just quote one more insight before I conclude my particular point. So, over the last year and a half, we have all seen what COVID has done. We worked on a very interesting partnership with an entity called as ACT Grants. This was India's top startups and investors coming together. They created a 100 crore grant and the idea was to introduce newer technologies and various complementary products to support government, various state governments to fight COVID. So we partnered with ACT, Action COVID Task Force for Maharashtra, and we were able to deploy a lot of technologies like, say, remote ICU, or say we had a short, we didn't have enough healthcare staff early on. So we were able to deploy a lot of such technologies, or we had a startup in Pune that developed an oxygen concentrator, which is today deployed close to 2,000. And so that was a classic example where, we saw the private sector folks coming forward, and we as, so if you, just on their own, they would not have been able to successfully deploy or reach out to various districts. But, we were able to work together with them and induct a lot of new technologies from private sector startups or healthcare startups into various districts across Maharashtra.
Thank you very much for that insight. And I think the State Innovation Society is really helping. I mean, especially if you're quoting the kind of numbers you are for the work orders. I'll come back to you on, the sustainability of that, because after the first work order, where has this led to, so what has the progression of some of those companies been? I'll come back to you about that. But I'll also now go back to Mr. Jain, because, you were talking about, for example, some of these platforms which have come into existence, which have eased sort of the procurement woes. And, the point is, how do we leverage what already exists? Now, one of the things was that if you go to e-procurement methods, that probably eases the pain for some of these MSMEs who are trying to, do things not online. And, if you make it online, then the electronic registration, all of that is made easier. Now, when you look at platforms like GeM, they still have sort of low participation rates, and out of some, I think 10 companies that we worked with, I mean, only 1 or 2, registered themselves. And part of the reason was that although the GFR exemptions help, when they are registering and all of that, but there is still, technical specifications, quality specifications that they need to meet, which honestly, some of our best value addition providers, I mean, some of the best startups we had in our cohort can't meet. And, so they're discouraged. They're also discouraged by the other vendors sort of who are there on the platform, who are disguising themselves as MSMEs and they're on the platform. And the question is that, how can we basically leverage this platform better to reach the right audience, and how do we make it easier for some of these companies which have very high value add, especially when it comes to urban service delivery? How can we help these companies engage with that more?
Yeah, so you're right. But in my opinion, GeM is taking a lot of stakeholder consultations and updating itself so frequently, and innovations are coming so frequently. GeM is also going to implement, so currently it is enabling platform for procurement of goods and services. But now GeM is also working on how works can also be implemented with standard templates and ease the process of procurement of works also. In my opinion, more stakeholder engagement with GeM, which is very progressive, taking a lot of quick decision and transforming its process gradually. So stakeholders must represent their views to GEM, and they will be implementing in due course. And a lot of other things are also coming. They are under discussion, and they will be you will be seeing on GEM shortly. This I would like to say.
Thank you, Mr. Jain. Shrishti, coming to you, you mentioned about the EV partners that you onboarded, and of course it's the railways, and I think to a certain degree there is more leverage, or there is more sort of bandwidth to engage with innovation in a way. But did you use a feedback process at all by which you could better understand the needs and limitations of these MSMEs, which may have precluded them from participating in the public process? And if so, is that something that you're incorporating as part of the processes that you're using?
So yeah, so I think it's a very valid concern, because when we started this process, we realized that we are new to this, and this is maybe not our core competency. But a very simple thing was very helpful in this regard. What we did was very extensive pre-bid, discussions, and in fact, pre-bid to the extent that even before floating the tenders, we had formal, informal discussions with various stakeholders, and access to some of them was also rightly facilitated by WRI's network. So that Jaya helped us gain, very useful insights into the ecosystem. And as a result, we could, make our bid documents which were suitable for all, in the sense that we could even engage a Tata for a EV charging point at CST, and some other smaller startups as well. So I think that discussion, which was obviously facilitated also by WRA, and we gave them a good, we gave them a patient hearing, because we realized that it is a complex ecosystem, an evolving one. And then we designed a tender specifically. So for instance, as previous speakers also mentioned, that with these startups, we see that it's very ironical, but when we ask them to participate in public tenders, we expect them to have certain, eligibility criteria, certain experiences, a certain kind of experience, number of years. And that is an antithesis for a startup, honestly. If we are acknowledging they are a startup, how are we expecting them to have those kinds of credentials and experience? So we took, obviously we took note of that, and we designed our tenders in that manner that we ensured legal compliances. We ensured that we were, getting basics right, but we did not insist on experience so much in some cases. And our tender document, I think, was such that could attract, as I mentioned, large number of players, and that was facilitated by, the stakeholder consultation and feedback from the provider.
Great, thank you, Shrishti. Mithun, coming to you, and like I said earlier, I think it is great to see sort of the success rate with your first work orders that you had for the startups. Did you interact with them post that to find out, did that then materialize into, significant amount of scaling that they could achieve with these government entities? Or was it just, the first work order and then, we don't know how they're doing? Because at least our experience was that, while we were also trying to facilitate pilots on many of our projects with government, some of them, I think just based on their business model, inherently they do well, they scale, they get the funding, all of that happens. They may or may not work with governments is another problem. But I think one of the things is that, how do you convert that first conversion into scaling? How do you scale what is happening on that first instance within a public process?
So that's a very relevant point, concern that you've raised, Jaya. We do keep in touch with all the winners that are there, regardless of, so say even from the 2018 cohort, we are in touch with most of them, if not all startups. Now, see, the pilot could mean different things to different startups, depending on what stage of their journey they are in. Like say, so if like I told you, there are a few startups, at least four or five each year, where we are the first customer to them. So in their case, it's about validating their product. When we are because as innovation society, what we need to do is to embrace failure. So we are giving them the pilot, and if they fail, we are okay with that, because that's the nature of the beast. That there is going to be a fair amount of failure rate. So out of the 24 startups that we have, if I have to be very honest with you, our success rate when it comes to the pilot execution is about 75 to 80%. So 75 to 80%. Now, what happens to the remaining 20-25? Some of them are not, although we do insist on an MVP when it comes to the startup, because what we are going to procure your product. Either they are not able to deploy at the commercial scale, or the startup is not able to exist for whatever business dynamics of the market. So we are it means different things to different startups. To another startup, it could be, I've done this pilot with government of Maharashtra, so I can go to UP, I can go to Kerala, get more projects from them. We have seen that as well. We have seen startups using this for raising their first round, saying that, I've worked with the government of Maharashtra and this is what I've done for them. Now let's also take an example of, say, somebody, I don't know if you're familiar with a healthcare company called as Niramai, which has built an AI-based breast cancer diagnostic device. So this is an AI-based device. So when they were a winner in 2019, and it's the technology is based on thermal analytics and AI. And since it's AI, when they came to us, they had only screened about 2,500 to 3,000 women, up until then. But when they won the Startup Week, we gave them a project to screen about 3,500 women. So that's like a straight 100% rise. And since it's AI, the more you screen, the smarter your device gets. So for them, it was important to screen more number of patients, because that's how their tech gets better. And when they go on to their next businesses, that's going to help them in a great manner. So what I'm trying to tell you is, it could mean different things to different people. Not everybody for sure has ended up with a larger work order from the government. But there are instances of people that have got follow-on or have been eligible for larger tenders from the government of Maharashtra. We know of startups that have a high, for example, let's take a company like Planis, which is from IIT Madras, was a winner of the Startup Week. But they have managed to get a huge number of orders from various governments, not just Maharashtra, post the pilot that they did. So it's not a cookie cutting situation where everyone ends up in a similar scenario. So it depends. So to each startup, it could mean a different thing depending on what stage and what nature of product. But in an ideal world, like I told you in the beginning, we would want this to be like a foot in the door. We want the government departments to be aware of these kind of products and then look for procuring in a larger manner. And we see that change happening, over the last 3-4 years, where with increased participation by senior bureaucrats, they are accepting innovation. They are trying to commit more funds and more time to and more receptive for various innovations that are there from startups.
And actually, Mr. John, I'll just stay with you for one more thing. I mean, in terms of basically solutions where, for example, if alternatives exist where the standards and specifications are not stipulated, in government procedures and in their contracts, but they may have a sense of what they're trying to achieve in terms of a target or an outcome. Have you helped any of your startups, or have you helped any of the government agencies work through this kind of a situation?
Sure. I mean, very often startups do come to us saying that, there's, let's take, I don't know if you're aware of the smart infra company, mobility company called as Roadbounce. So it's a Pune-based company. It was a winner of Startup Week. It wasn't a winner in 2019, by the way. They were in the top 100, but didn't make it to the top 24. So we do tell the top 100 companies that, should there be something we can help you with within the government of Maharashtra, they can reach out to us. But there's no commitment like for the top 24, we are bound to give them that work. So it so happened, and funnily so, that in 2019, if they had won the Startup Week, they would have got a 15 lakh order. But because they didn't win, and these are independent events, PMC actually had a contract where they wanted to monitor the roughness index of the road, and Roadbounds got to know there's something like this. They reached out to us, and they actually ended up getting a project for 50 lakhs, which is almost 3.5 times of what a normal Startup Week pilot would be. So that's and the good news, the great news is that this year they ended up being a winner at the Startup Week. So so that's one instance where we have seen that there's been. But for us, it's a regular activity where we try and help these startups connect with various departments. I'm not saying the example that I cited to you is not a norm. It's more of an, I don't want to use the word exception, but it's I don't want to generalize the scenario. But as far as we are concerned, we are very proactive, and in any instance like this, we are more than happy to reach out or join the startups for meetings, because that's where we have our edge, that startups may not be able to navigate the government machinery, but at least because of where we are positioned, we understand the concerns that startups have, and we are over the last 3-4 years have figured how to navigate the government machinery.
Got it. Mr. Jain, coming to you, I mean, you spoke about the least cost method. I mean, that's the most common one. But there is the quality criteria in innovation, in innovative solutions. Now, there is difficulty in selecting objective and objectively quantifiable criteria, right? Which leads to lowest cost bids getting preference typically. How do you specify quantifiable criteria that the quality of this product is better? So there's a value for money principle in tendering, and which can enable the government to accept a higher price for, higher quality. Is that something which is happening, or which is, proposed as part of any kinds of reforms overall?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The world is moving further. And if you look around the world's procurement processes and multilateral development banks like ADB, World Bank, and JICA and their procedures, etc. So we are having constant look on the world, how they are moving and bringing value for money in their procurement processes and systems. So in India also so it's not a fix, like we have several revisions of GFR. It's not a cast in stone. And so the least cost selection method since independence was part of our general financial rules. But you will see, once it was felt necessary, then reforms came in between. And we have introduced quality-based selection system, QCBS, quality cum cost-based selection system, amended in GFR, and is part of, but it is limited to procurement of consultancy services in special cases where quality is of absolute prime concern. So now we are also studying how value for money can be brought. We have seen both pros and cons. L1 will remain the most important method of procurement in public space. But L1 is not a panacea. It has its own strength and weaknesses. Like QCBS, we have introduced in GFR for consultancy services. So the thought process is how it can be implemented into non-consultancy services. You're absolutely right in saying that how to quantify the quality parameters. This is one of the challenge, and for that, to jot down the parameters and have absolute marking scheme for quality parameters. And then, so it has two things. First is how much marks you are assigning or weight you are assigning to quality parameter, and how much marks you are assigning to the cost parameters. So this is one aspect. And then how better or best robust marking scheme can be devised for quality parameters. So for that, you could have from various industry, you can see in specific cases that what are the other value proposition the offering can have, like impact on economy, employment generation, or investment by the bidder in R&D, or strategic factor like the procurement is being done by which strategic country, and so on. So you can devise a scheme giving weightage to those parameters of economy, strategy, quality parameters, and then once you have given marks to or weightage to all such non-price attributes, then we can have a better outcome. So such methods, such schemes are under discussions. So definitely there are pros and cons for each alternative method, like QCBS. What could happen if it comes into non-consultancy services, or can be extended to procurement of goods and even to the procurement of works. But if such innovations can come, then definitely in public procurement, a lot of quality will come as an outcome. And this would be a major reforms in public procurement space. So still committees are there to deliberate it, and soon you will see some recommendations coming over and will be implemented soon in general financial rules. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Jain. And it's also great to hear about the committees which are working on this to, refine the GFR further. I want to come to the capacity question. Mr. Jain, I'll stay with you here. Now, the European Commission has launched an initiative called the European Assistance for Innovation Procurement to train procuring agencies across Europe in innovative procurement. How it can be done. How do you do this? Are we thinking of something like this in India? I mean, there are the Maharashtra State Innovation Society. There are these kind of state innovation cells and societies which are helping that. But are we thinking of doing some training around procurement for agencies? Especially like Mr. Rao mentioned, at the municipal level where the familiarity or the awareness of the capacity may be much lower.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Urban local bodies require a lot of capacities, and in this regard, NITI Aayog, also broader framework of public project and program management reforms, which also constitute these procurement reforms. The committee has been set up, a task force has been set up at NITI Aayog, which has already formulated the national policy framework. And it was decided to have a body called NICPP, National Institute of Chartered Project Professionals. So the procurement is also a subset of these major reforms, in which QCI has been entrusted to form this body. And you will see soon it will be going to be launched. The body is already working on capacity building, capability building programs for various ministries and government officials and various stakeholders like from state and from ULBs. And so such capacity building program will definitely help. And another aspect is NITI Aayog is working on some model concession agreement. So this toolkit of documents and standard templates that will definitely support. So some of the out of whole vast universe of procurement of goods, work, services. We have already identified some key areas, and 20 to 30 areas. Model concession agreement and EPC model contract document are already existing with NITI Aayog, and NITI Aayog is supporting state in devising bids, successful bids, and further areas like for waste water management, waste treatment, waste to energy program, and several such areas where ULBs require capacities and training. So we are devising such model concession agreements, model documents, and providing them for implementation by them and for better outcomes.
Great, thank you. Ms. Shrishti, coming to you, there is you being a public official also, there is the question of risk and scrutiny, right, for government officials who are handling public funds, when they're trying to, procure innovation. There's a lot of scrutiny that can disincentivize engagement with innovation, in fact, to an extent. So what structure do you think can help distribute the risk, for stakeholder engaged in public procurement? And the other thing is that, do we need to engage with some of the, anti-corruption and enforcement agencies to sort of capacity build with them on, how this is needed and how can, some of these processes be reformed so that the huge risk, the burden of risk that the government officials bear can be shared or, alleviated to a certain extent? Shrishti? Shrishti, can you hear me? I guess I will. Shrishti, could you try taking your video off and maybe see if your audio is working, if you were able to hear me? Okay, I'll in the meantime, I'll go to you, Mr. Mithun, with this question. Any thoughts?
The question on the chat?
No, so the question of the, the risk, the scrutiny that the government officials that handling, who are handling face, and how can that be distributed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair concern, and we do get that very often. So what's very important is that each department or each district creates a clear guideline as to how do you onboard. See, most often the issue is there's no clear guideline. You like a startup, they genuinely solve a problem for you, but how do you onboard them? Because they may not, like I told you, fulfill certain criteria that you usually have for your tenders or your procurement norms, or there's no prior benchmark. So at least, can you create some kind of a mechanism by which you can get them on board, work on a small pilot with them, then getting them eligible for larger orders? So what's most important, and what we have been doing as Innovation Society, if we can have more departments to create some kind of a guideline as to how they can onboard startups. So what's most important for government officials is to have a clear procedure as to how this needs to be done. So that tomorrow, if there's a question that's asked as to why this particular company was onboarded, you have a document, or you have a reference point as to how and why this was on. So I think that's the most crucial aspect, because when it comes to something like this, there's definitely a high chance that a problem is going to be solved, but it's more about how do we onboard these kind of things. So it's more about entities like us, Innovation Society, reaching out to multiple departments and getting them to have guidelines or government resolutions like this to onboard startups. So because money is not usually the issue, if I have to be honest with you. It's about how do they channel these funds, or how do they onboard these startups, which is a larger issue.
Got it. Shrishti, are you able to hear me now? I'm just wondering if you seem to have some connectivity problem. Shrishti? Okay, and so let's see if she is able to get back on. And Mr. Mithun, I think the question in the chat for you, right? I mean, basically that it is focused on products, and how is the innovation basically? What about the GEM portal currently used by the GOI? The Startup Week in Maharashtra is focused on products. How can the Innovation Society initiate such opportunities for services That is.
Sure, I mean, it's a smart question. So even if you look at the startup peak, so Radha has rightly captured it because it's easier done in products than in services, and it's easier done because let's look at some relaxations that we have from the government of Maharashtra for procurement from startups. So we have a GR which says, up to 10% can be procured from startups, and there could be relaxations on the number of years of existence or no EMD. But the challenge comes when you have certain procurements where 100% procurement needs to be done by only one entity. So I'll give you an example. The other day we had an instance where a startup was trying to sell a smart ticketing solution to a particular department. Now, this is not an instance where the government is going to have two different entities for this. You're going to have only one entity because it's an integrated ticketing system for all modes of Nagpur. So there are challenges, when it comes to such.
Network Kamara.
There are challenges when it comes to such instances where the government may not be able to give 100% to that particular startup for whatever reason. Nor are they in a position to break it into a 90 plus 10 kind of scenario where 10% at least is given to startup. But when it comes to products, I would say it's not easy, but it's easier than in services. So in services, if I have to say, it's still a challenge, to have startups. But if you have clear objectives as to this, and I think one of the speakers did mention this, that if you have an outcome that you're trying to derive and then you're trying to onboard, then it's easier. But in the traditional scenario, and like I told you, even if you look at the startup group, I think 80, if not 90% of the startups that come are product-based startups.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try with Shrishti again. Shrishti, are you back? Can you hear me? Okay, I'll go to you, Mr. Jain, then. Again, I think same question to you about, what structure do you think can help distribute sort of risk for stakeholders and lower the bar, at least for government servants, and, lower the burden of the risk and the scrutiny involved with government officials handling public funds. Any thoughts? How do we, de-risk it? How do we make it slightly more, palatable for government officials to take those risks with innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a very real risk, and it may be underestimated by people who are on the outside, because I've had only 5 years of service, and in those 5 years, I've had more than 70 complaints, and there were serious ones in the sense that they would mark a copy to CBI and CBI and whatnot. And this is not just my story. Anybody who wants to be proactive, as you mentioned, feels that they may be targeted, or and then that acts as a disincentive. So I think the ideal way forward would be that these MCAs help, like having standard bid documents to some extent help, but it's a tightrope, in my opinion, as was also mentioned previously, that in India, nothing is really homogeneous. So we have to tweak it to the local requirements. In all of Indian Railways, all our divisions are not the same. And so when we are making those standard bid documents, those model concession agreements, while they are very helpful because they give officers like us a framework to operate from, but they can also be restrictive. So while designing those SBDs, one has to be more mindful of that. One is that having a framework helps. Second, I would feel that having a clear-cut policy on the subject, which also delineates explicitly the focus on innovation, focus on cost saving, focus on bringing on board MSMEs, should be written out in black and white, and which is being increasingly done, as we all know. Third, I feel, and it is my own personal view, is that there should be an institutional mechanism within government so that if officers want, they can take recourse to legal remedies if they are targeted, and that happens more often than not. And all of us feel that we have nothing that we can do. And I understand it's an occupational hazard and we are totally okay with it. But having some institutional safeguards will be helpful, will motivate more people to be proactive and to push for innovation, I think.
Absolutely. And do you also think, I mean, I said it half as a joke, but not really, but do you think that we should engage with and capacitate maybe, some of the anti-corruption enforcement agencies? Is that dialogue happening, or is that something that needs to happen better?
I think it's a very valid line of thought. And you'll be happy to know that I think it is happening. And I can speak of vigilance within my organization. They seem to be very aware, I would say, they try to be very balanced. And during our civil services training also, we have been, told that vigilance is not something that we should be scared of really if, we have not, if we have followed all due processes, and there is a scope for genuine error also. So I think that is the way forward. And from my experience so far, I think our vigilance agencies are also very aware, and there are very frequent trainings that they undergo. We keep reading circulars about that. And that's an important thing, I'm sure.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. Mr. Jain, are you there? I can't see you. Just checking. And yes, so actually now I'll just close now. Thank you for the great discussion. One question for you, Mr. John, was that, in terms of what you have been able to do through the State Innovation Society, are you helping other states, or other states reaching out to you to help them understand how to kind of develop a similar model?
So one good thing that Startup India has done is they have created a ranking framework for states across India, ranking based on various innovation-led initiatives. And NITI Aayog also has an innovation index. So like I told you earlier on, most states in India, if not all, have a dedicated team. And there's a lot of healthy competition as well as collaboration, because each year, there's a state ranking that happens. So there's a lot of collaboration that happens, and we do interact with various nodal agencies. So we talk to our friends in Gujarat, or Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. So the Punjab government wanted to set up something, so we did have. So there's a lot of healthy collaboration that happens between the states, and that's one thing about the startup ecosystem. There's a lot of helping each other spirit when it comes to something like this. But I think most states have now realized that the whole startup wave is kicking off. It's creating a serious number of jobs and adding to economic value, which is why most of them have a dedicated entity in place to drive the startup ecosystem, which is really great. For somebody like me who came in from the private sector or the corporate sector, this was probably one of the few ways I would have gone to work with a company, although it's for a short stint.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Jain. And Ms. Shrishti, last thoughts coming from you. I mean, I think one of the things that you mentioned very important is the institutional mechanisms and safeguards that need to be put in place in your role as a government administrator, as a government official. And there are things which are happening on the fronts of the GFR also. Mr. Jain talked a lot about how these are constantly being updated. There are model concession agreements. There are many things that are being developed to aid, bringing MSMEs. Back to the question of, when it comes to public service delivery. So we were talking about wastewater energy, but it also holds good for transport. It is an essential service in cities. Any thoughts on what is the first thing that needs to happen, or what is the thing that needs to happen in the short term now that we should focus on? You're on mute.
Yeah. So I would say, because it's a progressive forum, so I would like to probably request all of us to rethink also procurement. And from the examples that I cited from within railways, it was an example of how we undertook asset monetization along with delivering services. And that, honestly, I can speak for my ministry, is happening across the board, in the sense that if you look at station redevelopment program, it is not only about, you know, garnering investments for the ministry. It is also equally so. It is equally about ramping up the standard of you know, transport services that we are delivering to our citizens. So that kind of rethinking will also enable us to promote innovation, to save cost, and also move in the direction where we can see mobility truly as a service, and, you know, promote integration between different modes of transport, promote green sources of energy from our premises, and truly develop our premises as a transit hub. So I feel that that kind of rethinking about how as a government agency we can procure services through different modes, through a direct procurement mode is the one that maybe Niti Aayog representatives were very nicely elaborating on. But I think this is also a parallel channel which Railways has taken a lead on, and through which, on a smaller scale, we have been able to provide things like, you know, better passenger experience in form of upgraded waiting halls, in form of digital signages on stations, in form of you know, developing better ways of disseminating information to our passengers. And these are all services in my mind, to my mind. So that kind of rethinking of how we can procure will be helpful. And I think examining railways recent sort of developments, and all across, I'm not saying it's only Mumbai that has done so, will give us a good direction as to how we can provide these urban services in an innovative and, you know, sustainable fashion.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shrishti. I think two very very good takeaways. One is that there is no one size fits all approach, and so procurement needs to be looked at in many different ways. And like you said, the railways, and I think ESL actually, amongst others, you know, some of these agencies have put in place really nice models that we can probably transpose and look at for urban services as well. So with that, I would like to close the session. I would like to thank you very much for participating and for this wonderful conversation. This is definitely not the last of it. We will continue engaging with you, and we hope to see you on the other side of Connect Karo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaya.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was great to be a part of this.